Now, since the good people of Middlesex, London brought me here to hold this Liberal government to account, let's talk about their atrocious record on food affordability in Canada. This issue impacts many families across Middlesex, London, a sensation they feel every single moment that they step through those automatic doors at the grocery store, the relentless squeeze of food inflation at the cost of living crisis that this Liberal government still refuses to confront honestly. Back in May, when asked how Canadians would hold him accountable, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Canadians will hold us to account by their experience at the grocery store." Well, he may regret those words today because, judged by that very measure, he's absolutely failing. Food inflation is 70% above the Bank of Canada's target. Food prices are up 40% since the Liberals took power. Food bank use in Canada is up by 142% since 2015. The Daily Bread Food Bank expects 4 million visits to its food banks in 2025. Food inflation numbers that were released on Tuesday morning show overall inflation at 1.9% year over year in August, but grocery prices are up 3.5%. Meat is up 7.2%. Beef is 12.7% higher compared to August last year. That's not a rounding error. That's a kitchen table crisis. Families aren't just making ends meet anymore or making substitutions anymore. They're actually skipping meals, and it's getting worse. Years of elevated food inflation mean that we are all paying today's higher prices on top of last year's increases. No wonder Canadians feel like the ground is shifting below them in the cereal aisle. Let's be clear about the scale of hardship. In southwestern Ontario, local food banks are repeatedly warning that shelves are tough to keep stocked year-round as demand grows. And in Middlesex, London, 1 in 4 families is food insecure, which means they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. This is not and should not become normal in a country as blessed as Canada. When a government needs to step in to help and feed you or your family, government policy is failing. Canadians see the disconnect. So now let's walk through how we actually got here. First, policy mistakes. The government slapped counter tariffs on U.S. imports last spring, going far beyond steel and autos that hit a long list of grocery items. Food economists warned that this would raise prices in the very aisles where Canadians were already hurting: coffee, tea, pasta, spices, nuts, citrus. And sure enough, we saw renewed pressure in July and August. Then during last spring's election campaign, the government quietly paused many of those counter tariffs on May 7th. No fanfare, no accountability, but a tactic admission that they made a bad problem worse. Second, volatile tinkering. The so-called GST holiday on groceries created chaos in pricing systems, compliance headaches, and disasters across categories and distortions. Since January, food inflation has surged from minus 0.6% to 3.8%. Liberals claim this was inevitable, but federal meddling did not steady the ship, it rocked it. Third, structural costs the Liberals keep piling on. Ask any grower, trucker, small processor, or independent grocer about their biggest upward pressures: fuel costs, carbon taxes on the supply chain, red tape, slow approvals, and a broken competition landscape that concentrates power in the hands of a few dominant retailers. When Ottawa pretends these inputs don't matter, they are pretending families will not see it reflected on the receipt at the grocery store. So let's dig into some numbers that Canadians are living with. This is what the people in Middlesex, London are seeing at the checkout. Beef top sirloin up 33%, canned soup up 26%, grapes up 24%, coffee up 22%, sugar up 20%, canned tuna up 19%, apples up 14%, vegetable oil is up 13%, and chicken is up 11%. These are not luxury goods. These are staples. The average family of 4 is projected to spend almost $17,000 on food this year. That's over $800 more than last year. 61% of Canadians worry that they won't be able to afford groceries 6 months from now, and that fear is even higher among young adults and modest income families. These are not abstract figures. They describe the family in the minivan beside you in the parking lot. In Middlesex, London, local headlines have reported crowded food bank drives, community cupboards running at capacity, and frontline volunteers stretched thin. I've met with many pantry coordinators who say demand spikes high right before rent is due or when the hydro bill lands because people simply run out. When a mother tells you she's learned to ration fruit for her kids, you don't forget it. And across Canada, the story is the same. Because I'm a Conservative, I'm going to talk about supply, not just the symptoms, Speaker. I grew up on a family farm. I still run an operation today, and I've said it many times before. I will say it again. No farms, no food. If we don't support Canadian farmers, we will have less food, higher prices, full stop. The Liberals' poor policies on the carbon tax, fertilizer tariffs, carbon tax tool 2, the clean fuel standards, plastic packaging bans, and red tape have punished farm families working on the thinnest of margins. They have piled costs onto producers, haulers, and processors, then acted shocked when prices rise at the till. That's not economics, Mr. Speaker, that's denial. Let me also debunk a fashionable fallacy I keep hearing in Ottawa, that banning modern food packaging and plastics will magically make life cheaper and greener. Well, it will not. In committee rooms and plant floors across Ontario, I've seen how safe modern packaging prevents waste, extends shelf life, and keeps costs lower for consumers. If we import more than 80% of our fresh fruit and vegetables. Long-haul supply chains need reliable packaging, quality, and safety to preserve our quality and safety of the food. When activists force rush bans or label essential materials toxic, they don't make food cheaper. They make it more expensive and more likely to spoil. That's not a theory. It's what the industry has warned, and it's what common sense tells us. For any Liberal that disagrees, I will happily give any of you a book to read by a leading expert in the field, Chris DeArmond. He's reviewed over 4,000 peer-reviewed scientific studies on plastic, and I agree with him that, quote, the problem is clearly not with the plastic itself, but with the behavior of some humans who litter. In the real world, plastic films and trays extend shelf life, cut spoilage, and keep food safer through transport and storage. This is critical in Canada. And he says, quote, smart packaging isn't the villain, it's the reason your lettuce isn't soup by Tuesday. Ban or replace plastics with heavier, leakier alternatives. You don't get greener, you get more waste and more emissions. Treating plastics as toxic would add 50% more waste at retail, up to 150% across the full supply chain, and add a further 22.1 million tons of GHGs tied to food waste, over 8% of national emissions. But the bottom line is simple. Banning plastics will not solve the problem, it will create more problems. The current Liberals have continued Trudeau's legacy, Mr. Speaker, by holding a disastrous record on making Canadians poorer and food more expensive. Current Liberal spending and deficits today are only getting worse. Conservatives deserve better, and we will deliver, Mr. Speaker. Effective policy will focus on better design, recycling, and responsible use, and not swapping materials for food to spoil faster, break in transit, or drive higher transportation emissions per kilogram of product delivered. If we care about climate and affordability, smart plastic packaging is part of the solution, not the scapegoat. Conservatives call on the Prime Minister to stop taxing food by eliminating the industrial carbon tax and fertilizer and farm equipment, the inflationary money printing deficits, carbon tax to the so-called clean fuel standard, and the food package plastics ban, packaging requirements, and the plastics registry that will drive up both costs and waste. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yay,
Questions and comments? The Honourable Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my colleague's comments. The member and I have the privilege of representing the good people of London West, and I've spoken to so many people in London who, during the time that we had the GST pause, they saw an increase of people using the restaurants. They saw families go out and buy goods. I've heard from families in London who have benefited from the dental care. Actually, it's more than 1,290 children in London West alone, not covering the entire region of London, have benefited from the dental care. The child tax benefit has uplifted so many families in London out of poverty. Why has the member voted against all those things that help the people of London? And today she's talking about helping and supporting. Why does she vote against them?
Honourable Member for Middlesex London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague across the way for the question. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that a GST holiday for a short period of time doesn't actually solve a long-term problem that these Liberals have created with affordability in Canada after 10 years. Mr. Speaker, Conservatives believe that the government shouldn't be having to pay for kids to eat. Parents should be able to provide for that. But it's these government policies that are forcing people to go to food banks because they're increasing taxes. They continue to punish farmers with an industrial carbon tax that puts the cost of fuel and everything for food inputs higher. So if the member truly did want to help people in Middlesex London to be able to afford food, perhaps they'd look at some of their policies and actually do things that will bring the cost of living down for Canadians.
Well done.
Questions et commentaires. Le whip en chef du bloc.
The bloc whip. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for her speech. I appreciate this member and miss her from the Agriculture Committee. My first question, well, I won't ask the same question as my first question because I didn't get an answer, and that is if the disappearance of, why didn't the disappearance of the carbon tax cause food prices to go down? That was my first question. But my second question is about all the slogans and the things about taxes that aren't really taxes. For example, the plastic ban and so on, which is not really a tax. Anyways, let's talk in concrete terms. For example, how about a process that would examine price fixing in grocery stores? We worked a lot on that together. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. I do miss the Agriculture Committee. It was great working with you on the committee. But he raises really great concerns, Mr. Speaker. When the government continues to have a commercial carbon tax on fuel for trucks that transport our food, whether it's from the farm field to a farm to be washed and sorted, graded and packaged and then sent again on another truck to a food distribution center that then sends it on another truck to a grocery store, Mr. Speaker, all that added fuel cost adds cost to the food itself.
That's right.
So it's no wonder that when food arrives at the grocery store, the retailers have to put up the price because the price has gone up all along the value chain and the supply chain before it ever reaches to the consumer at the grocery store, Mr. Speaker. And if we want to talk about the P2 plastics ban, getting rid of plastic packaging, it would take more GHGs and more trucks on the road to deliver paper packaging to places versus...
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The member for Lethbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has said that with the coming budget on November 4th, we can see record deficits, or we should expect to see record deficits. This is concerning. This is very concerning for a myriad of reasons, but today we're talking about the increased cost to food and the increased cost to living and the struggle that Canadians are having. With a government that insists on spending more money that we don't have, what impact will this have on Canadian families?
The honourable member for Middlesex London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleague for that great question. Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing from constituents across Middlesex London, and here's one example that they said, it's evident to me that the government's response has fallen short in proportion to the severity of the challenges faced by our communities. To be clear, there's nothing normal about what is happening in Canada, and these issues must be approached with urgency that they require. Families, seniors, students, and new Canadians are being forced to make impossible choices between putting food on the table and paying for other basic necessities. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to see less money spent by this government in deficits and stop the money printing and give Canadians policies that will make